Wonderful. Right. Michael Cole, thank you very much for joining me on Perspectives. It's a great pleasure to have you on. And I'd like to start with a bit of an introduction, but I normally like to hand over the reins to my guests and ask them to do the introduction themselves. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, or should say
Sure.
did at this point. But yeah,
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Reese. Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm now a retired automotive executive. Spent something like 41 years working in the automotive business. Started in retail. So I'm probably talk about. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was leaving school. I'm thinking about going to college, and I suppose, drifted into automotive through accountancy. I trained as an accountant and started in a car dealership business. And that became something that just evolved into a much broader career, moving out of accountancy into sort of general management, eventually through field roles. And then spent, to say, more than 40 years in what I think is one of the most exciting industries. I guess people often say that the business they've been in a long time, but a business that you can always talk to people about. Most people have an interest in cars, or a lot of people have an interest in cars. So to have worked in a business that was so vibrant, so dynamic, and to be honest, in the last 10 years, changed dramatically. It meant that I never got bored with what I did. I feel very fortunate to have worked in the industry so long and worked with so many great people and some great brands. Moved from different car companies and finished my career at the end of last year with Hyundai Motor Group, where for the last 4.5 years I was running the European operation, sales, marketing, manufacturing, basically the whole gambit of the business. So that was where I called it a day last year. Decided that it was time to come back to the UK. I'd left the UK in 2012, really, and wanted to be out with family and give more back to them because they'd made lots of sacrifices over that. Well, family certainly over the last 30 years. So yeah, that's it. Automotive guy through and through, and happy to talk about any aspect of that or my career that you would like me to cover.
perfect. Well, as you can see from the posters behind me, I think you've come to the right place if you're into the automotive world. I've got my Goodwood mug as well. So
I've been there
my
many times.
yeah,
Great, great, great event there. Yeah.
my study is plastered with it at the moment. So yeah,
Good for
well,
you.
perfect. Well, thank you. I mean, it's yeah, as you say, it's an incredibly interesting time at the moment for the automotive world. Yeah, we've seen that massive sort of seismic shift towards the reduction of emissions and the rise of electrification, of course. And I was actually curious to know what the spark for the EV kind of interest would be. And I started doing a little bit of research around kind of the history of EVs. And I was actually really surprised to know that the first EV created was actually back as far as the 1890s. So there's a
Yes.
chap called William Morrison who did a six-passenger vehicle, 14 horsepower electric motor, and then of course that was sort of had the rise of the Henry Ford's Model T, and then that kind of popularized the kind of car industry as we know it today. But I wanted to focus for this conversation on your own kind of personal journey through that career rather than the wider industry. And one of the things I found particularly interesting about your career is the length of time that you had in each of your roles. So, um, scouring your LinkedIn page, you had nine years at
Oh,
Ford, 15 years at Toyota, and then obviously moving across to you did some time at Kia for sort of Kia UK for 3 years, 5 years in the European sector, and then in the US as well. And then obviously you've just mentioned about your time in Hyundai Motors as well. Nowadays, the common advice that gets peddled is you should stay maybe 2 to 3 years in a role and then seek to either move into a new role in another company or perhaps sort of seek a different role internally. But that seems to be the kind of sweet spot that they peddle at the moment for you know, aiding progression or climbing the ladder, getting that pay rise that you want, all that sort of stuff. So I was curious to know what was the reason behind you staying at these companies for
yeah.
such an extended period?
Riz, I guess it shows how things do change over generations because you remind me when you make that comment that when I was setting out and so I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was leaving school. Um, I remember my father giving me the advice to say, get into a big company, get a career, get on the ladder because you'll get a pension, stay with that company and they'll look after you. And I guess that was the sort of mindset I probably had when I started out in my career. Um, Although I think initially for a lot of people, you start one job and probably don't stay too long because when you're younger, I think that hasn't changed. You still have this urge to want to try different things, meet different people. So whilst you talk about my 9 years with Ford, I did only about 18 months with the first group. It was a big London group called Godfrey Davis, and I went there as a trainee accountant. Um, but I did then get into a role in a company. It was a big Ford dealership in Maidenhead, very successful, loved it. And to be honest, I think I stayed there too long because I did probably have that thought at the time that it was actually part of, believe it or not, it became part of the TXB Bank. I don't know where
Right.
which is now Lloyd's. So we were part of a big entity, a good pension scheme, and it seemed like it was a group that would be a good place to build a career. And I stayed there, but regretted it later because I think this chance to have new experiences and try different things was something that I soon realized was more important for me to grow individually and professionally. However, what I would say is I think it depends to a degree then the organization you get into, because this is where, listen, my final and biggest role was with Hyundai Motor Group. So I am a Hyundai fan more than anything else. I am still I see myself as a brand ambassador for Hyundai. But I have to give great compliment to Toyota because Toyota is not only a great automotive company, but it's a great employer, a very strong ethical company as well. And Toyota was brilliant for me because I joined there when I was about 30 years old, just around the time I was getting married. And I spent 15 years at Toyota, and I think I did 8 or 9 different jobs, and across all sorts of different parts of the organization, whether it was financial services, sales, marketing, after sales, fleet sales, and that gave me the opportunity to keep learning new things and to expand my knowledge and breadth of knowledge of the automotive business, which is the business I'd decided by then that I was going to spend my career in. So I think it varies. If you're in an organization that is respecting its people and wants to develop its people, you don't need to necessarily be moving organization. Now, not everyone has the opportunity, but I'd have to say it's something Toyota was very good at. I am in a cohort, I guess, of people I still know now. Other people who went on to much more senior roles within not only Toyota but other car companies, and I think that's where I felt I probably got lucky to some degree with the company that I joined as a first sort of global organization. Getting into Toyota was fantastic for my development and my career. So that was why I guess I did that. I stayed 15 years at Toyota. To be honest, I was going to stay longer. I was about to move to a European role with them when I got approached by Kia, and I hadn't been thinking of leaving Toyota. I'd otherwise stayed there quite happily, but I heard all about Kia. This is 2009. Kia, part of the Hyundai Motor Group. It was a really exciting time. It was an opportunity for a brand coming from Korea, which was a rapidly growing economy, a hugely ambitious nation. I can talk about Korean people, favorable all the time, wonderful, wonderful people. And I saw this opportunity to be in at something new. Toyota was a big organization, very successful, not only globally, but in the UK. Kia was a small brand, not so well known. Products were probably not seen as so attractive or are not established in the market. And I saw the opportunity to go there as the managing director for the UK and really, help a new brand become a major player in the market. And certainly, and I obviously only played a small part in that for Kia in the UK, but they have proved their ability to go on and do that. And that was hugely exciting. And of course, that brought me to other opportunities. And I would never have considered working for any other automotive brand or other automotive company than the Hyundai Motor Group. There's such a dynamic, fast forward thinking organization that I had a great, well, in the end, just over 15 years with them. So to a degree, it's not only about you as a person, but it's about the organization you're with. And if the organization gives you opportunities, so Toyota was earlier in my career, so there were more sort of middle management roles, but you mentioned, I think in your intro, you know, Kia UK, Kia Europe, Kia US, then back with Hyundai, opportunity to work in different continents with different brands with different responsibilities. And for me, that was always what was more important than trying to change to find a new employer, to constantly have that challenge and to try new things.
Yeah, awesome. No, it's you mentioned there about, obviously it's clear your passion came across for the sector. Was there a distinctive moment where you kind of knew that this is the industry you wanted to stay in?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I missed out one little bit of my career, and I don't know if it's even on linked or whatever, but I think I told you I joined. I went into the business because someone I knew, it was a family friend. He gave me some career advice in a pub one Friday night. I was probably 18 in the pub, and he said, "Do you know what you're going to do?" And I said, "Not a clue, John. I don't know whether I should do any further education, and I just want to go and get a job." And he said, "Well, you need to get a qualification." He said, he said, "You're good with numbers." I'd always been good with numbers. He said, "Why don't you do an accountancy qualification?" He said, "If you do, I'll give you a job as a trainee accountant at the Ford dealership in London." So I said, "Okay." So I went off and did my year, got my foundation course, and then started with them. But he then moved on. He moved within the UK to set up his own Ford dealership, and I lost a bit of enthusiasm for the job I was doing. So I looked for another job local to home and actually left the automotive industry. So I've been 18 months with this Ford dealership in London. I joined um, a huge industrial company in Slough as a assistant accountant. And I remember sort of going through the door the first morning, nice people, sat in an office and thought, "Oh, this is dull." It was just an office, and we had a big factory that was producing some electrical conduits out the back, which meant nothing to me. And I'd spent the previous 18 months working as an accountant in a car dealership where everything was happening every day, fast moving retail business, sales, service, body repair, whatever. It was just fun. And to suddenly be an accountant in an office when there was things happening in the back of the building that I didn't understand, I realized I'd made a mistake. And it was only because I guess there were such nice people and given me an opportunity. I stayed for about 9 months, and I just couldn't wait to get back and kept looking for the right opportunity to get back into a automotive role as an accountant. And that's how I got into the job I did in this big Ford dealership in Maidenhead. And to say, after that, decided there was nothing else I was ever going to do. I was going to be in automotive, and you know, didn't know what that would be. I mean, I was obviously on the retail side in those days. I actually did consider, I was probably about 27, 28. I considered opening my own dealership. I looked at a few opportunities with different brands, didn't do that. And to be honest, I think in many respects that was better for me because I enjoyed them making the transition from working in retail to going into, the OEM, into the global car company sort of roles. That excited me even more because it opens up huge opportunity, not just in terms of retailing, but then in terms of that whole national or international sales and marketing, manufacturing. And that was, I guess, what I found so fulfilling, to be involved in the whole range of the business, from even at the end, giving all my input on designs for cars that are still not on the road yet today, getting involved in that design process all the way through to the manufacturing, the distribution, and then the ultimate sale and customer experience.
That's great. So it's, I mean, most industries you only get you only ever see a very small portion of the work that you do. So I can understand how that must be quite a refreshing experience to be involved in kind of the whole product life cycle from design and
Oh,
actually seeing it through. And when you're talking about moving around there, it sounds like you had a real curiosity to learn and develop, which I think people get stuck in roles and industries at the moment, and or not at the moment, but just throughout their career. It's you hark back to what you were saying before about um, it was you used to be career men. You used to be like you'd have that one job. And, I met one guy at a place I used to work at, and they had like an annual awards evening, and then a couple of people had 25 years. There are
Yeah.
a few more that had like 30 years. And then there are a group of people who had 40 years experience.
Yeah.
By this point,
It's
I'd
incredible.
nearly fallen off my chair. And there was one person who had had 50 years at the same industry. And to
Yeah.
me, I mean, congratulations to him. That's obviously, he's
Yeah.
obviously loved it enough, but that sounded like the worst thing in the world to me. Like, I couldn't imagine spending that much time in the same place. Yet people get very, very stuck in the company they work for. They get comfortable, they get the house comes along, the mortgage, the kids, the dog, the car. So that kind of ability to transition to new roles and, take the leap into maybe something a bit different can be quite off-putting for some people.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would say to kind of
Well, you hit on it. You talked about comfort. It's career advice I've given. I don't know for how many years now. Always say to people. I remember. I guess it was in my days at Toyota, particularly. When I first joined there, I did a role which was what they call business development manager. I was going around talking to dealers about how they could improve the business. I did that for 18 months. Then I did a sales role for probably about 2 years, 2.5 years. And then an opportunity came up to go and do like a secondment to the financial services Toyota organization. And I was offered it. And I remember lots of people said to me, well, you don't want to do that. It's into financial services away from the sales business. And I said, yeah, but it's another experience. It's another learning. And I did that. And I've done it a number of times in my career. And I have this thing I say to people, come out your comfort zone. Sometimes it may not seem like the obvious choice, but it is that it wasn't that I had a fear of being stuck in the same job, but I knew from my time. I mentioned the job at Maidenhead. I think I became company accountant or financial director there when I was about 24, and I was still there when I was 29, 30. And I realized doing a job 5 or 6 years, the same job, as fun as it was, because in retail, every day is different. So as much as I enjoyed that job for 5, 6 years, I realized I was getting tired. And what it was one day, someone came to see me and asked something. And I'm a very easygoing person. I always try and be very positive. I snapped at them a bit. And when they left, I sort of went, under my breath, I went, idiot. And then I sat back and I thought, actually, I'm being unreasonable. It's me. I've been in this too long, and I'm now assuming that everyone else should know what I know about this. And I think that was a subconscious in my own mind that you shouldn't do any job really. This is my personal view. I think once you get to even in a senior role, maybe 5 years is about as long as I think you really are adding the value and getting the enjoyment yourself. So I had that role very clearly, and I say that's when I retired last year, I was 4.5 years in the role at Hyundai. I always thought that the latest I would do it to be this year, because I think I think it's good for the individual, and I think it's good for the organization to have change. And I think it's good that Hyundai now has someone else running the business Europe who will have different approach than I had, and that's good for the organization as well. And it's sometimes probably brave to say, I've got a lifetime in this job, but it is important. So I the advice I give to people is, you know, think about opportunities that may not seem like the natural one, but it gives you a chance to try something new, to move into maybe a part of the company that may not be seen as the most, you know, attractive or exciting, but you'll get new experiences, you'll learn new things, you broaden your own, knowledge, and that's good for the organization and it's absolutely good for the individual. So I say to people, come out your comfort zone, be prepared to try something different.
excellent? I've been curious to talk to you about setting goals and targets just while we're on this, the subject of changing and achieving kind of new things. Because anyone looking at your career can see that you've obviously been driven enough to even have held a fraction of the roles you have. You talked about sort of MD at Kia UK, and then you've gone on to, become the presidency of Hyundai Motors Europe, which incredible achievements and testament to your kind of your successes and your approach. But I wanted to go a level deeper and just gain an understanding of how you kind of frame your own development. So can you talk me through your process of, how you set your own kind of goals and targets, and do you have a particular approach to this?
Yeah, Interestingly enough, again, it's something I've told people over the years to be careful not to become tied to your own personal goals. So I, I, I found myself, I guess, ultimately having the career I did just by the fact I was prepared to take on new roles and new challenges and move, not just in the UK, but in Europe and globally. But I never, quite honestly, recently, and people said to me, "You sure?" I said, I never sat down and said, within the next 5 years, I need to achieve this, or by the age of 40, I want to be doing this. It I don't want to say it was a career by accident because it certainly wasn't that, but it was just one a case of saying, look, let's think about what the next role would be that I would enjoy, that I think would add, a string to my bow. How do I keep making myself a better person for this industry and for this company and for this industry. So I didn't set any sort of personal career goals, so to speak. I guess it's human nature, maybe for all of us, be a bit competitive. So if positions, I remember it was the case at Toyota, if a position became available and it was the next level up, there'd be a few of us who'd be saying, "Are you going to go for that?" Yeah, well, I might go for it. So there's that competitiveness, and I do remember there was one job I went for this. I can't remember what it was now, probably just as well, and I went for it. I didn't really want it, but I was disappointed when I didn't get it because it was almost like I've gone for it and I didn't get it. So there's that competitive aspect, but I can't say I ever created, career or personal goals other than to try and just do the best I could in any job I was in because I knew it would then be recognized and would give opportunities. It's very different from the way I approached my job when I guess the first time I really did it in my Kia days as an MD. You feel you are person responsible for really setting the targets and the goals for the organization. And that's something I am very strong on. And it's something that, to be honest, surprisingly didn't exist in many of the roles I went to. So I would always, you've got to be realistic. It could take 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a bit longer. You have to understand the company, but I would always then create the vision, mission, and the strategy and a roadmap. So we say, look, where do we want to be in the next 5 years or the next sometimes 10 years? But really, 5 year windows always for me were the thing. And actually, then not only have a goal for the company, but actually lay down the plan of how you're going to get there. Because I say, everyone can say, for example, when I went to Kia, I think Kia was selling 35,000 cars a year. And we said, our goal is to sell 100,000 cars. And we actually didn't I was keen not to put a window, but in my own mind, it was always 5 years. But I said to the team, that's not the goal. That's a goal. It's fine to say 100,000 cars, but now we've got to build a strategy and the plan and have a roadmap and look at all the different elements that we're going to need to get there. And that's the most important thing, I think, not just having an aspiration, but having a clear plan of how you're going to deliver it. I say to people, it's a bit like when you get in a car. If you don't know where you're going, you have to put something in the sat nav. You have to say, this is where I'm going to get to. And then you make your plan for how you'll get there. And that was something that I, really enjoyed doing, which surprised me because I'd always thought that I was more of a day-to-day operational person, firefighting, because I came from retail. But I really enjoyed, I learned to enjoy probably over the last 15 years or so, this need to be more strategic and to plan things and to think, what resources do we need? How are we going to manage this? Who else needs to play a part? And build something that you could then measure yourself against or measure the organization against. And I've said the teams I work with all enjoyed that process as well.
Yeah. So you say about, I think it's interesting your point about not, tying yourself to some goals too rigidly because you do feel like sometimes you have to set these kind of ambitious targets for, at least in my own experience. And I've set those kind of 5 year, 10 year goals. And to be honest, it puts an enormous amount of pressure on you that I just think can actually be a bit detrimental rather than help you grow. Because if you're not kind of within the realms of what you wanted to achieve by a certain time frame, you can feel like you're failing a lot of the time, and it isn't
Yeah.
necessarily the case. It just means that perhaps you've taken a slightly different route. There's more than sort of one way to skin a cat, as they say. But yeah, I think that's some of the detrimental effects of maybe tying yourself too rigidly to a development
It
goal.
is. And I say, I don't think it was. it wasn't, I say, it wasn't a conscious or effort either way to do it or not to do it. But I do agree with you. I had one colleague, someone I did promote with in Toyota days, and he lasted. He was a great guy. I promoted him, and about 6 months later, he came and resigned and was going to the car brand. And I said, "You're only 6 months into this job." He said, "Yeah, but this is a new opportunity. It's more senior, and I need to take this if I'm going to reach my goal to be, a managing director by the age of 45 or some wherever it was at the time." And I said, "I think that's a mistake. It can actually, you've got to be careful. It can sometimes force you into, I don't want to say the wrong decision, because the guy's gone on and had a good career in the business, but uh, for me, that was a mistake. The guy would have learned so much more by doing the role I promoted into for another 2, 3 years and then move on. So I think you have to be careful that you don't sort of get, your decision making isn't driven by the goal. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's bad to have goals and ambition and vision. That's good. And your comment about failure, I guess it's becoming more and more a buzz now, and it was a key thing for me, particularly working for a Korean company who were very ambitious. And of course, no one likes failure, but I would get this message across, and I'd stand up in our big town halls or on video links to all our stuff across Europe, and I would say, and I've said it very openly, it's all right to fail sometimes. We're trying things. We've got to keep trying. We're trying new things. They won't all work. The key thing, obviously, is first of all to do everything to avoid failure. But if it does fail, react quickly to it to correct it. So, you know, I read this now more and more, and I'm so pleased to see it. People say, don't be afraid of failure, because one way of not failing is just not to try things, of course.
So that word failure is actually a question I had for a bit later on in the conversation. But I'm curious to know then that word failure can mean lots of different things to different people. Um, how do you frame failure?
I guess it's when it doesn't achieve. For me, it was when it didn't. I said I like to, when anything we did, any sort of decision we made, particularly the strategic ones, were always with a goal in mind. And if you didn't achieve that, then ultimately, it depends how close you are to it. Of course, that for me was a failure, because it meant, we thought this was going to deliver a certain result and it didn't. But I would always be keen to say, but that doesn't mean that we were wrong to do what we did, because we'll have learned something from it. And you just have to, using the expression I got in the States, pivot. You have to just tweak it or do something different. So okay, let's learn from why it didn't work. Now, to be honest, there were some things, particularly in the last few years, there was a lot of change going on in the automotive business. We tried some things that just didn't work. I mean, they did literally fail. It didn't get anything like desired result, and then you almost, well, to be honest, some of these things we sort of backtracked on altogether and said, okay, we tried it, it didn't work, but let's not be too, we can't be too big to say, we're going to revert to where we were before. Sometimes you try things and they don't work, um, and I think that's the thing, not to sort of hang your head in shame with it, but say, look, at least we tried. We did it for the right reason. It hasn't worked, so we try something else.
Yeah. I mean, you've had you talked about being MD and president, and you're actually steering the ship, so to speak, of the successes of the company. When it gets to things that maybe didn't work as well as you'd intended them to, or hoped for, ultimately you do have a positive outlook. I can see that's very apparent with the way you talk and the way you're talking about the businesses you're in as well. But at some point, there's got to be a time where you start to think about a reflection on yourself as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you're in these increasingly more high powered positions, lots of stress, lots of responsibility, brand new cultures, brand new environments, completely different environments from where you are in the UK and across the whole European industry as well. How do you make sure that doesn't sort of, you don't take that personally and you treat it
Yeah.
more as a
Great,
professional?
great. Sorry, great question, Reece, because it is true. I mean, we're all human, and we all want people to look at what we're doing and say, "Oh, they're doing a good job." And so, again, I think I was very fortunate. I tended to have that, whether it was colleagues or even media saying, "You're doing a great job there," whichever brand it was. But it doesn't always happen like that. And to be honest, the last couple of years, have been tough in the automotive industry because there were so many disruptions really coming out from COVID, from supply crisis, and then going into this EV switch. So we had a really, really successful time coming out of 22, 23. Uh, Back half of 23 and 24 were tough because the industry was tough. And when we, as a brand, we'd grown so quickly. We were gaining market share against established brands, and that's tough to do to sustain it. So last year was a tougher year for us, and you're right. It's this thing where you you don't want to let people down, not only your colleagues, but I very fortunate to say I consider I have a close relationship with the chairman of Hyundai Motor Group, who is basically the third generation of the family, and I would meet him, fairly regularly, and I would hate to think that I was letting him down by not continuing this success that I'd had with the group for 15 years. So you have to be sort of not too brutal on yourself. You have to understand again why, if things aren't going as well as you would like them to go, why is that? And providing, I say to everyone, providing you can say we're doing everything. There's we're not doing anything wrong. There's sometimes external factors that can influence the overall performance, and providing you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I believe I'm still taking all the right actions and we're doing all the right things, then it's very difficult to do anything else because sometimes things just don't go the way you want them to go. We don't operate in a vacuum, and I say that's particularly clear in such a competitive industry as the automotive market. The number of car brands there are now competing in the market. I say this. I know it's not about the industry so much, but I did a I had to go and talk to a group of journalists probably about 20 years ago in the UK, and I was asked even then to talk about how is the industry different from the one you entered in 1983, 84. And I remember looking at the stats, and I wish I could remember it now, but it was something like, you know, 80% of the sales in the UK car market at that time were made up by 10 brands. And the top three brands took about 50% of the market: Ford, Vauxhall, Rover.
Mm.
And at the time, this is 20 years ago, I said, now look how many brands you need to count for the top 80%. It's like 25 brands. And obviously, you had all the German brands getting a lot stronger during that period. But of course, now, I'm sure you know exactly what's happened, the Chinese brands.
Yeah.
And particularly because of the EV trend, now the market is so competitive. So that for me was always a thing to say, look, for a brand to keep growing every year is almost impossible. Even the strongest European brands, VW had a tough few years. They're coming back. They've
Mm.
done better the last 2 years. But you just can't keep growing. So you have to sometimes look at that and say, okay, I'd love to be, this golden Midas touch and say, every year we grow, we keep growing. It's not realistic to expect that. Even the best brands will have years where sometimes, and of course, it's product cycle. If your product cycle isn't right, if your best selling model is mid-life cycle, it's very difficult to keep, going when someone else brings out a brand new product in a hot segment where you're no longer the new kid on the block. So you do in the business, you'll have this, it's a cyclical. So the thing is not to beat yourself up and say, am I still doing the things that I think are the right things? Are we still reacting to the market? Are we correcting? Are we looking for where things might be going at and taking action? And if you're doing that, then I think you can live with yourself rather than having those
Yeah.
sleepless nights of worry about, oh, it's not going as well as I'd like it to, because it just doesn't always go the way you want it to.
Yeah. There was you mentioned the word belief in there, and I think that was quite a nice point to draw upon, because there's if the data is telling you you're wrong, or the data is telling you that that we're in a period of decline and maybe the things that we've tried haven't necessarily worked, but you mentioned about we're still trying new things, trying to better ourselves and trying to push the business forward. You mentioned the word belief. That sounds like a very key part of what you just said,
Yes.
as to why you could kind of keep going. Do you think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing to have, is belief?
I yeah, I mean, I think there are times you have to have the courage of conviction as well to say, look, we're on a path. We've created this strategy. Obviously, you adapt it. We would always, every year, even we had the 5-year strategy, it was rolling. So you every year you're looking to see what needs to adapt, what needs to change. But I think I I actually got quoted. It stuck with me for a while from 2 years ago, where Tesla reduced all their pricing, and I was interviewed, I think, by Automotive News Europe, and I said, we're not going to knee jerk to what Tesla do. And that became everywhere I was quoted. It's about we're not going to knee jerk. I said, but it's true of anything. We have a strategy. You know, and if you knee jerk react to everyone else's actions, you're not true to your own strategy. So what you believe in and what you stand for, and it's something, if I heard my older me talk 40 years ago and be talking about brand and brand promises and being true to the brand, I'd have thought, who is this guy? Because I wouldn't recognize it. But I realized, and I think it was something I sort of got the experience through my time in European roles, particularly the importance of having a brand that has an identity, and that identity really has to be consistent not only in every way you talk about the brand, but in every market. And that's challenging in Europe, where obviously the German market, as you can imagine, is much tougher than let's say, the Norwegian market, because the Norwegian market doesn't have any domestic brands, the German market does. So you have to sort of adapt a little bit your position in the market, but you can't change your brand identity. The brand has to stand for something, and you have to remain true to that. And that's to say, the belief of who the brand is, the way the brand behaves, is what's most important.
Mm. You were talking about the rise of the Chinese EVs, and when I was a kid, I used to be able to identify what cars were on the road by their headlight. I even got so good I was, I could tell by the headlights.
Yes.
Now there's so many brands on the road. I've literally have no idea. First time I've ever seen. There's
Yeah.
I saw one the other day, an Xpeng. Would never seen it before in my
Oh,
life.
yeah.
I was like, oh, that's another one that's just popped up.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the brand identity thing's interesting because I think that's something that Kia and Hyundai did very well.
Yes.
The Kia obviously had a 7-year warranty, and that was like when that first came out, that was
Yeah.
unheard of at the time. It was, people couldn't believe how long the warranty was. And then with Hyundai, the cars like the Ioniq 5,
Yeah.
that to me is a very cool EV because,
Absolutely. It's
and
an
that's something
amazing
that
car.
really, yeah, it's something that really I really liked about the brand because they were doing something a little bit different. Whereas the thing that I don't really enjoy so much now about the car industry is everything is downstream of someone's design. Porsche came in with like the light bar,
Yeah.
or at least I think it was Porsche that sort of did it. And then suddenly every car had a light bar on the back. We've got
Yeah.
these, not to my taste now, but the glow, the light up badges now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who thought that was a good idea? Beats me. But there was nothing really new coming out, and you could. Even Honda, I saw there was one of their SUVs came out the other, a couple of years ago, and it looked like, you'd taken a Volvo XC90 and a BMW and kind of smushed it together, and I couldn't quite tell what it was trying to be. Whereas the Ioniq 5, for example, that was completely new. It was its own car in its own right. It didn't really echo anything I'd ever seen before, and that's something that I really liked about the brand, and that they were trying to do something different and push the boat out.
Do it's a very strong sort of ethic they have. That obviously either side I would be over for the design reviews nearly every month towards the end, and you would look at products like, I mean, the Ionic sort of sub brand, Ionic 5, Ionic 6, now Ionic 9. People sometimes say there's no similarity. I mean, the Ionic 5 and Ionic 6, don't necessarily look like they're from the same family, but there are certain elements, that are consistent. But the view always of the design team was, we don't have to have like a Russian doll effect of products. They refer to it as the chess set. So the idea is the base has to be a base that's the same, but above that, you shouldn't be constrained by trying to make every car look as though it's the same, just a smaller version or a bigger version of the same thing. So and that, to be honest, from a designer's point of view, is fantastic because it gives the designers the freedom to be more creative, more innovative. So I think it's something that Hyundai has done particularly well, and Kia does well too, but Hyundai particularly well that, each vehicle, yes, it probably you need to know how to look for the family likeness, but the reality is there is a consistency within it, but it doesn't mean that the car has to look like a bigger version or a smaller version of something else. They have their own identity.
Yeah. I saw the drift cars. There was the Ioniq 5, the Ioniq 6 at Goodwood this year. They did a drift car version. Um, Again, pretty crazy.
Uh,
And there was there was a render. I don't know if it was ever a concept car, if it was ever planned for production. It was like the Envision 74. So it was
yes, yes, yes. I'm Vinny 74. Yeah,
um, that
you never know.
was
Something could still come from that.
yeah. I mean, that was very very cool. Again,
Oh,
something
incredible.
new and it kind of I think Toyota brought out or they had an image of the Century, but they'd kind of done a bit of a resto mod for that as well. Like that kind of thing, I think would be really popular because it it best of both
Well,
worlds really. It
it's
takes the
again,
design and
it's being brave. I mean, it's a tough market, obviously, because development costs, engineering, well, project costs, huge. So bringing any car to market is, it's a phenomenally expensive exercise, and you have to try and get the economics of it right, obviously. But it's again where Hyundai's been very brave because a product. Obviously, you talk about Ioniq 5, the Ioniq 5N, and now there's an Ioniq 6N launched this year. They are incredible pieces of engineering. I mean, they are supremely sophisticated vehicles. I mean, the technology in them is phenomenal, and to be honest, it almost overly engineered, but it was the this passion of wanting to do that to create not only an environmentally friendly car, but one that would be just a scream to drive, and the cars are amazing. We couldn't use it because of trading standards or what do you call it? But it's allowed to. You can't say zero emissions because people say, well, there's tire emissions, rubber. But I love I tried to use the phrase of zero emission, 100% emotion, because driving an Ioniq 5N. The first time I drove it in Korea a couple of years ago, I obviously knew it was an electric car. But when I got out, I said to the engineers, the best testament I can give you is if I didn't know it was an electric car, I would think I'd just got out of a gasoline car
yeah,
because it's got all the noises, the accentuators, and it has this like hesitant the gear shift. It's built into the way the car responds, and it's just an absolute blast to drive those cars, particularly on a track
yeah.
and to
I can
drift
imagine.
them. I got to drift it as well.
Got the drift. I haven't actually driven any of the I haven't actually driven an electric car yet. I had friends who had like Teslas and things like that, and he did floor it in the sport mode, and that was insane levels and of performance. And you've seen what McMurtry are doing with their. Have you seen the sort of fan car that they've got? Yeah, that's brilliant. I love seeing innovation like that, and I think I don't want to see that die off, and that's I think a concern for a lot of petrol heads,
Absolutely.
um, car lovers, is that they immediately attribute EV to the dying off of something anything good, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be that extreme.
No, it doesn't. And the reality is, I mean, we are moving inevitably to electrification, and this is something we were always keen to try and say. Having an electric car doesn't mean that driving has to be boring. I mean, anyone who likes driving cars enjoys the sometimes that sensation of the noise, or even if you like a stick shift, I love to drive a manual car still, but you can still have fun driving EVs. And I say some products more than others, of course. But yeah, it's a transition that we're going to have to go through. So
Yeah, embrace it or get off it.
I'm afraid so. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, just going back to your roles then. I
Yep.
believe you're the first, European or non-Korean native to have held the role of president CEO
Yes.
of Hyundai Motors Europe. Obviously, that's once in a lifetime, huge achievement. Um, this is going to sound a bit job interviewing now, so I apologize. But if you could pick maybe any three words that would epitomize why you were the right person for that role, what do you think they would be?
Three words. It's. I, I would say, is it a word or is it several words? Uh, Results. certainly in terms of getting the job in Europe, what I'd done elsewhere in the group was clearly recognised by the powers that be. So my previous results, I think, was one. Globalization. That's an interesting one because it's not so much about me, but it is a reason why I know, again, if you take our chairman, belief that, to be a really successful company, you need to be a global company, not a Korean company working in all the different markets. So there was I think, a desire from the top to have global leaders rather than necessarily. It needs to be the best person. Obviously, you don't appoint someone just because they're a different race, whatever. But I, there was clearly a desire to have local management, so European management in a European region. So that was one of the reasons. I think another one is, I don't want to say personality is not the right word, but do you know? I'm trying to think how I'd express it. It's about who you are, and I not blowing my own trumpet. I'd built up a very strong reputation within the group for the way I went about doing things. And I think that's not just the results. The results are one thing.
Mm.
Had I gone about it a certain way and the results weren't good, I don't think I'd have got the job. But I had a certain style of the way I ran a company. I am not. I've never been a table banger, uh, what I would almost call like the old autocratic. And there were, when I first entered the automotive industry, there were a lot of bullies who were the bosses.
Yeah,
I'm not
come
a
with the
shouter and a
shivers.
screamer. Yeah, I mean, people know if I'm not happy. I mean, if things aren't going right, no one's in any doubt that I'm telling them that we have to correct things. But I've always been, the way I'd put it, I had a philosophy for myself early on, which was sort of a reworking of a philosophy of not my first boss, but my boss when I was at Maidenhead in Ford. He always say to me, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. And I sort of evolved that, I guess, a little bit to sort of say, I want people to perform for me as a leader because they want to, not because they have to, because they know they're going to get their ass kicked. You know, the positive energy from delivering for someone that you respect is so. Maybe that's the word, respect, rather than personality. I had respect, from the leaders all the way through the organization. I think that's something that, I'm proud of because it meant I could be who I am as a person and still achieve results. So yeah,
Yeah.
respect, results, and the fact that there was a desire from the top to have this globalization, not be a Korean company in each market.
It's incredibly interesting that you say that because as someone who's, a bit further down quite a way down the ladder compared to where you were, of course, um, it amazes me how you still see in leadership today, or maybe you can't even call it leadership, or people in those positions where they are bullies and they do take this kind of real autocratic approach. Now, I'm always of the opinion that if I respect you as a manager and your leadership, it makes the tough news absolutely fine. Like, I don't need to be spoon fed. I don't need to
Yeah,
be coddled. However, I do like to have a level of respect shown to me as well as, it goes two ways, right? And I always think that if you have someone who is respectable and who respects you, I always think that you're always willing to go the extra mile and
definitely.
do that extra bit of work those extra few hours, whatever it may be. And ultimately, I think that would pay off. But it amazes me how that really isn't a common thing you see in.
No, you're right. And I can share, that frustrated me because I still would see it. I mean, in certain parts of our organization, it felt as though we weren't quite making those transitions, but it was something that I was always keen to do, to say, and I say, I if I'd recorded all my town hall videos for everyone, often they were about how we are as a company, how we're going to perform. We talk about results, but it was more about who do we want to be as a company, as an employer brand as well as a consumer brand. So it was always important to me that people should feel respected, and I also, this thing, yeah, and again, it's sometimes overplayed. People talk about empowerment. I talked about it regularly, and would say to people, we are going to trust you, we are going to empower you. It doesn't mean that you just go off and do whatever you want.
Mm,
We have governance, we have boundaries. Yes, we have some rules, but we try and make those boundaries as broad as we can, so you work within them. And you all know the vision. You've all got it printed. You all understand what it is, and if what you're doing is going to contribute and help to that, we give you as much freedom to do it the best way you can. So I tried not to be one of these bosses. Certainly, with all my vice presidents, I'm sure they would recognize this. We would agree the strategy and the direction, and we'd talk about how we're going to get there. But I wasn't onto them every day. The way I worked, I had a daily meeting. So on a Monday, I'd meet with one function, Tuesday another. So we'd have a touch base every week, and we'd just go through the key tasks, the key priorities. But it was just so they could tell me how they were getting on, what was happening, and they set the agenda. I never set the agenda for those meetings. I'd say, you come and tell me,
mm,
what are the big projects? What are you working on? Of course, if they miss one out, I'd say, well, hang on, I'd like to know about this.
yeah, yeah.
But it's about saying you're responsible, you're accountable as well for this. It's not just me. And again, I don't want to say, because I'm sure lots of people say these things, but it's something I really believed in. I said, we are a leadership team. We're in this together. So I'd say, and it's not always easy for everyone, but if we're sat in a meeting, I would even some say to the marketing guy, "What's your opinion about the sales on this?" And I say, "Look, don't be afraid to touch each other's business. We're a leadership team, so we should be able to say to each other what we think, and we should all be able to work together to improve things." So if someone from one function was talking about another one, so I would say, don't feel threatened by this, or don't feel they're attacking you. This should be constructive criticism. So we all discuss what's happening in the business. We all need to know, and we all need to care what's happening across the whole business, not just don't be blinkered to your own function. Think about
Mm.
the others.
It's empowerment, I think, is the
Absolutely.
word. Yeah, yeah. Being able to trust, build trust with your team, and for them to take it away and know that you've entrusted them to deliver, and to actually go off and do the right thing. I think that's hugely
Well,
underappreciated and
ultimately,
undervalued.
it is a virtuous cycle, isn't it? If people see there's the trust, they then act on that in the right way. Hopefully, I mean, again, you have to keep having the checks. It doesn't mean you're sort of hands off and say, "Oh, whatever,"
Mm,
but you have. I am a believer in, you have to trust people. Most people want to do the best job they can. There's not many that are swinging that. Most people are there because they want to add value.
yeah,
And the best way to get to add value is to give them the most amount of freedom you can.
to do that. Yeah. Do you think, or whilst we're on the subject of leadership, do you think that everything a leader needs can be learned, or do you think there are certain innate qualities that these roles demand that kind of exist outside the realms of learning?
Yeah, good question. I think I mean, you can learn lots of things, and I'm sure people, there's lots of books, leadership books.
Yeah.
I think that personality is always a little bit in there. I think, we are, to a degree, the type of people we are. And, let's be honest, there's times where I say, my style was not to be a shouter and an ogre. But sometimes you think, oh, should I? Maybe if I'd been a bit tougher on that, we may have done a bit. That's not me. So you say, I can't change the person I am. I am. So, this is how I'm going to be a leader. This is how I'm going to, manage. So I think, yes, of course, you can learn, you can improve. And it's the old thing, isn't it? If you can recognize what your defaults might be, you have some way of trying to adjust them. But so yes, you can learn lots, but I think there's a lot of inbuilt. Your own personality determines the sort of leader you are to a large degree, I think.
Mm, yeah, it's really interesting. I oh, a lot of these like these leadership books, these, the same with productivity, but all these kind of self-help books, they do have limitations in that a lot of a lot of them are based on someone's, anecdotal experiences. So one person's experience, your experience is not going to correlate to what I'm doing at the moment, or maybe the vast majority of listeners, they're not in the position that you were in. They didn't have the experience that you were in before. So I think with a lot of these things, you need to take it with you do need to take it with a pinch of salt, of course.
Well, you do, because it's like I said before, no one's working in a vacuum.
Mm,
There are so many external factors that influence every different person, every different organization, every different industry, or organization. So it's not there's one right answer, you
mm,
know. And actually, I just as I say, not one right answer. It reminds me of my Toyota days. I had a really good guy running one of our regions when I was operations director. Really, really good guy, but he tended to be a bit one dimensional in the way he managed people. And I think you actually used the phrase earlier. I remember sitting once and said, There's more than one way to skin a cat.
yeah,
You do have to sometimes think, I need to approach this differently, because some people just have that one way of dealing with an issue. And I'd say you can't do that. You have to find ways. And do you know, the the situation where I found that most important was when I first joined Kia. And I worked for a number of different presidents before I was a president myself, in UK, Europe, US, all different, all Korean, because obviously, as you said, I was the first non-Korean president. All good people, but all very, very different. And I realized that I had to adapt I was either an MD or a chief operating officer at the time, and I would have to change my way a little bit to adapt to them, because I knew I wasn't going to change them. I mean, so you do sometimes have to remain true to your own beliefs and values, but you have to just find a way of sometimes navigating your way through these situations.
yeah. Having that level of introspection to be able
Yes.
to adapt to, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just gonna completely go against what I just said about, sometimes it's having these experiences are not applicable to your life. But if you if you could credit one maybe skill to your career successes and the challenges and how you've navigated them, um, is there any standout skills that you think have been really instrumental
Um,
in your success?
do you know, I haven't thought about it, but all I'm thinking as you ask that question is, uh, I know over the last few years, particularly, and even when I left, and obviously I had many, many very nice messages and compliments, and I think one of the things that sort of dawned on me almost as I was leaving, the thing that kept coming across is people said, and some people that I really respect, some very senior people, not only within companies I worked with, but in the industry, would say you always stayed calm and you always seemed to have a smile on your face. However bad the situation was, or however difficult it was, you didn't ever let it show. And it's funny, again, it's just me as a person. And that's so reassuring to so many people, particularly the teams that you work with, because if as the leader, you get all flustered and panicked and
Mm,
angry and red, people think, oh, this isn't good. In a bad, they don't like to see that you're almost out of control. It's reassuring to people when they see that you say, okay, this isn't where we wanted to be, but let's keep going. Let's find what. So I think that calmness, I would almost say, and positivity
mm,
was probably the thing that in hindsight, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I got all these nice comments and I thought about it, and I've had more time to think about it, I guess now than I've had for a long time, you'd say, okay, that might have been one of my best strengths, the fact that I didn't get flustered.
yeah. No, it's really interesting. So it's like enhanced pragmatism where you're just kind of taking everything at
Yeah.
everything you can move forward from every situation and not just kind of hitting a dead spot. You're always looking for
Yeah,
the route
like,
forward.
people don't wanna see panic. I mean,
Yeah.
and I guess that's the thing again, comes with this thing about knee jerk. Yes, you have to adapt, you have to change, you have to find ways of solving problems, but, if you go into a fluster or a panic or start throwing things around, people don't feel easy with that. I think, "Oh, well, this isn't the sort of leader
Mm.
we want." I think that's. Doesn't mean you can't show some emotion. I mean, that's fine, but keep in control. I think is an important aspect for a leader.
Yeah. It's that kind of like I hate using this term energy but it is that kind of people can feel the mood, they can sense what's going on, and it does permeate through, a
Yep.
business, environments that you're in. If someone's, if everyone's down and dejected, it is very, very hard to be the outlier. That's always the one who's kind of positive and keep it going. So
Yeah.
to have that from the top down is, yeah, I can see how that was so beneficial for the company. So my final question is a little bit on that, and relating to sort of, you're in these roles with elevated levels of stress and responsibility. It's always that pull or that desire to, work that extra day or work those extra hours. I just want to understand how you manage to balance sustaining yourself and being a high performing individual,
Yeah.
kind of how what that looked like for you.
Something again I found relatively easy would be almost making it sound as though I didn't care, but I've even in the most challenging times, I would be able to let things rest at a certain point because again it comes back to that sort of understanding that I can't change everything. Worrying about I'm very fortunate that I'm not the sort of person who worries. I'm not a worrier, and when you know people who are, you say to them, "Don't worry." They say that's the worst thing you can say to me. So I feel very fortunate that I'm not the sort of person who genuinely worries. So even I wish I could give some sort of example of crisis that we face, but there were plenty of them. But I would obviously be always thinking about things for as long as I felt that it was adding some sort of value and not creating mental stress. So, for example, if I got home at the weekend and I tried so hard to protect weekends always, didn't matter what job I did, weekends were really for the family. It wasn't always possible. I had to work some weekends, particularly in the US. Weekends don't really exist necessarily.
Mm,
Um, but I always was very good at saying, okay, this is now I've left the office. I'm leaving behind what isn't done now is not going to get done by me worrying about it or spending the whole weekend or the whole night fretting. Don't get me wrong, Reece. I mean, the worst sleepless nights. If some things are really bad and you can't get them out of your mind. But generally, I was able to, I guess, just tell myself it's not helping to bring these things home and to worry about them because I can't change them.
mm,
So I would say generally I was able to decompartmentalize and say, right, I'm now in my time or my family time. It slightly contradictory that, of course, is a thing where I remember once in my Toyota days, I left the office on a Friday night. We're going on holiday to France. And I'd worked late. I was trying to get things done. And I got home, went to bed, got up the next morning, went to pick up my car keys and my phone off the console table. Where's my phone? And realized I left it in the office. So we had to drive by the office so I could get my phone because I couldn't be on holiday and not be checking my phone, my emails. But the way I would do that, I would look at the phone, I would deal with an email, and if it was a problem I would want to deal with it, I'd get on, I'd send an email back, I'd make a phone call, but then I could switch off. The worst thing would be not knowing that there was a problem.
mm,
So I would always rather know of what's happening. And even and my wife was, I think she struggled initially, but she was great on all the holidays. She would say to me, "Oh, you've been checking your phone, have you?" I said, "Yeah, I just had to go and check it. I dealt with a few things." But that was the best way for me to be able to manage not being in the business when it was a holiday or a long weekend or whatever. But for the night times and for the weekends generally, I was able to, I say, decomp, oh, decompartmentalize and say,
yeah,
this isn't work anymore. I'm not at work.
yeah.
Not easy, but I could do it pretty well.
No, it sounds like this idea of they call it the locus of control. So you can control the controllables, and then some things are going to be outside the realms of your ability to
And
control. So
so
there's no point worrying about them.
and that is exactly I tell our kids all the time, say, don't, I'm not going to worry about the things that I can't control. If I can't change it, it's pointless. It's just burning up so much wasted energy
Yeah,
to it. So I try. No, it's not always possible. We do, and in business, and particularly if you are responsible for business, there are times when you fret or worry, and I could wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh god. But generally, I was able to say, look, if I can't change it, if I'm not going to fix it now, just let it lie. We'll tackle it tomorrow.
awesome. Michael Cole, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on. So thank you very much for your time and your wisdom and your insights.
No,
I'm sure
great.
the listeners are going to get loads from this. So thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, it's great. It's been great to talk to you, and hopefully we'll catch up with you somewhere sometime soon.
Absolutely.